no muscle, no hustle, no backbone. I stand alone, not tripping, just saying I'm different. Ain't hanging on to the coattails of the...
Well, thank you for joining me today. This is MrNotAdvice, and this is part 2 in a 2-part series that I started a week ago. The first part covered if I do and where I do see hope or have hope for our country's future, for our own zip codes and our families, and then globally. And I made the case that I think Gen Z is going to be an integral part of that. This second episode, I'm going to talk about why I think this election matters, who I think is the best candidate, and why. But I want to say a couple things before I get into that. I am not going to engage in conspiracy theory or, this is some part of some great plan. That's not important at this point. What's important is I'm going to look at each of the candidates in the same way that I look at investing, right? You constantly hear me talk about don't fall in love with the story. Don't marry a stock, date it. Look at the facts, look at their actions, right? It doesn't matter what you think, it matters what they're doing. And so I am going to try to use that same type of methodology and critical thinking and looking at the two candidates that are before us for the presidential election. I do think that this presidential election is, and I've said this many times, I think this is going to be one of the more crucial elections. There were elections where, quite frankly, there wasn't going to be much change no matter who was elected, the way the makeup of the government is at that point. I look back to the Clinton years where a lot of what benefited Clinton was there was gridlock. And there was a check and balance in place. So if something did get done, you knew it had to go through the fire of two parties that were diametrically, they just hated each other. And so I do think when we look at today's election that it is much more pivotal, much more important than I think some previous elections have been. And again, I'm talking purely in this podcast from an economic standpoint. Now, some of the things that I'm going to use as a metric are going to be taxation, economic indicators, but I'm really going to be looking at quality of life and potential for future taxation, more or less, and or regulatory burdens. Because I think at the end of the day, when you look at a candidate, I think it's more important to look at that candidate through the glasses of evaluation of how is that candidate and their policies going to make your life better or worse. Again, speaking from an economic standpoint, but involved with the economic standpoint, sometimes social and cultural and civil liberty issues also are possible data points. But I promise you, I will not go into, especially with what happened this past weekend, the assassination attempt on Trump. And there's already all these outrage and on all sides. I have arrived at the point in my life where I've found that it is actually very rare that decisions made based primarily on emotions turn out to be the right decisions. And so that is as true as it is for investing as it is for elections. I think that's true in many facets of our lives. So I'm going to ask you to leave your emotions at the door. Leave your biases and what you think. If you hate Joe Biden or if you hate Donald Trump and you can't get beyond that, you're probably not going to get much out of this podcast. And I would challenge you that in allowing yourself to be governed and driven by predominantly the emotional side of your makeup, that you are creating blind spots that the logical, intellectual side of you might be able to recognize that could change your decision. I also want to say that I am not a MAGA Trump supporter at all costs. There are things in his private life that, if they are true, I don't agree with. So same thing for Biden. But I'm not electing the guy on what he did in his private life. I'm electing him based upon what I think and who I think will give me the best probability for my life to be better. Okay? And so let's dive into this. On one hand, we have a businessman, and he's been successful in real estate. He's been successful in media and television and social media. The guy's successful. I don't think there's anything disputing that. And I'm going to already short circuit if there's anybody out there. Yeah, but he got his money from his father and he's had to file bankruptcy. And okay, look, yes, those are all true. However, he's still here and he's still successful and he's still a billionaire. Okay? I cannot comment, and it is not important to me to comment on how he got where he's at, because if I'm going to go down that road, then I need to bring up where Joe Biden has gotten his money from. When you get into those types of discussions, there can never be a right or a wrong point, because we can't undo it, nor will we ever know all the facts. And yes, obviously I have strong opinions on both of the candidates and what they have been doing in their personal lives. So, but I think it's material to treating this as which candidate is going to give us the highest probability for our lives to be better, right? We're investing our vote. So, and I know there's some people out there that, say, well, I'm going to withhold my vote. And I think, why would you do that? Why would you do that? Well, I don't like either one of the candidates. And I guess my response to that would be, well, then I think you're thinking with the wrong part of your brain. I think you're thinking with your emotions. And I think I would challenge you to listen to this podcast and let's look at facts. So we have a career politician. We also, on one side, we have a businessman on the other side. Let's look at each were in office about the same period of time. Biden's almost, 4 years coming up here in January. And so let's look at what has been accomplished under their watch, with the caveat of knowing not everything that happened under each of their watches did they create, nor did they cause. And let's start off with Biden. Biden did not cause high inflation. Okay? High inflation was caused by the trillions of dollars of liquidity and money that was printed out of the air by our Fed and our Treasury Department. Biden came along and inherited that mess. Okay? Now, I do believe there are things that Biden could be doing to help relieve that burden, and he has chosen not to do, right? I think he could take a much harder stance with commerce, with big companies, especially when it comes to food costs and grocery costs, and take a much harder stance on both shrinkflation, or the size of the package gets smaller, but the price doesn't, as well as the price of many staples being up anywhere from 15% to over 100%. And so I do think that those are areas that he has failed in. I don't think it's been a priority to him, nor do I think he's had the political backing to be able to affect any great change. I think when Trump was president, we had at the time lowest level of unemployment amongst people of color. I think we also had at that time, I think, quite frankly, it doesn't matter the candidate, but with COVID happening, it was an absolute chaos, catastrophic to industry and commerce, right? And so I don't score Trump great. I don't score Trump bad getting through COVID. I look at one of the things that really points out to me when you look at the two candidates is one is a populist and one is a globalist. So a populist is what Trump is, MAGA, America first, right? Saying that first comes your country and then comes the rest of the world. Whereas a globalist says, hey, yes, it's good to be collected under one nation's flag, but we live in a global world and we need to be able to interact. And those relationships with foreign countries are as important, if not important, than what's going on in our own backyard. So we have a globalist and a populist. Those two things right there will tell you a lot about how they're going to treat their second term. We know from evidence that when Trump was in office that he liked to wield the threat of tariffs pretty regularly against countries that he thought were taking advantage of the United States of America. And I fall down in the camp of I agree with them. Whether it was NATO or whether it was the global warming that he chose to pull the U.S. out of. I agree with that. I think that the U.S., because it has been so successful over the last 100 years economically and so stable politically, that I think we did get taken advantage of many times. And so I think what we'll see out of Trump is the wielding of that tariff threat more. He's already stated a couple industries he's going to do it in. And, that's not a bad thing. When I was in Korea, I remember seeing the cars and I made the comment, why are there no foreign cars here? There's no Mercedes, there's no Porsches, right? I mean, there are ultra wealthy people in Korea and they're driving around in Hyundais and Kias. And I'm thinking, what the heck? Well, what I found out is there was 100% tariff on foreign cars. So that meant if you were going to go out and buy a Tesla for $85,000 in Korea, it would cost you 170. And that extra 85 was going straight to the government, right? Trump enacting a 10 or 15% tariff, okay, is not unusual. And in fact, it is more the way business is done in the world than it is not. I look at tariffs, they are completely protectionary. They are meant to benefit only one country. So therefore, they're not globalist, okay? A removal of tariffs and a lessening of tariffs would be more a globalist position, which is what Joe Biden has championed. So we have that demarcation between the two candidates. Globalist, populist, one is going to use tariffs, the other is going to be less likely to use tariffs. I think both candidates did a terrible job when it came to the debt of this country. I think that they both understand that if they were to immediately sign an executive order that the Fed and the Treasury or the Fed's got to be audited, and I think it would cause an economic collapse. I'm not saying that's good. I'm not saying that's fair. I just believe that's the way it is. And so both of them, as far as I'm concerned, have done a terrible job managing the debt of this country and the deficits. So I would call that a draw. I think from a personal taxation standpoint, again, I don't hold Joe Biden responsible, okay, because a lot of our taxes appear to have gone up. And in fact, the tax burden on the average U.S. taxpayer has not gone up. It's been gone down, according to the Heritage Foundation. However, it's because our incomes have not increased measurably that we are feeling any additional increase in taxation more poignantly, right? So one example is property taxes. And again, this is not something the President of the United States of America has direct control or influence over. Okay, Joe Biden can't help it if Denver, Colorado has a shortfall from spending money on whatever they spend it on. They can't do anything about it. That they then have to go out and increase property taxes because the value of the properties actually went up. I see that as a neutral net for each of the candidates, because neither one of them is going to be able to do anything about that. That's primarily at the state level. Property taxes and the mill levy is set, and really at the local level. From a taxation standpoint, the largest tax that homeowners are obviously concerned with is the property taxes that they have to pay. In terms of consumer taxes, so the money you spend, when you get gas or you buy groceries, I do think that under Trump, and especially because of the overturning of Chevron, that there will be a push to remove some of the regulatory burden that exists in trying to conduct business in America. When I was involved with a company in Texas, I was just astounded at some of the stupid regulations that were in place that were costing that company money. It even goes as far back as I was the chairman of the board of a finance committee for a private school, and we were trying to move our location. And, one of the things they came back with, this was the local city and county government, was that the number of bathrooms we had for the school was inadequate. And they actually want us to have one bathroom for every, I think at the time it was 10 students. Now, think about it. If you're a school with 120 students, how are you going to have 12 bathrooms, right? But then they took it further. They required us to put a new stoplight in and crosswalk, even though none of our students would have been entering through that location. That was $1.5 million. That was an additional cost of doing business. And those were not laws on the book. They were regulatory additions to existing law. Okay. I think under Trump that it's more likely, if for any other reason because of Chevron being overturned, that some of those regulations could be pulled back. There is no argument that I'm a smaller government person. I believe that federal government is too large and that shrinking it is good for everyone. I don't think Biden is there sitting around, okay, saying, I'm going to increase taxes on the American people. That doesn't get you reelected, okay? If I'm looking at what could we expect, probably the same thing out of Biden, which is not much. I mean, he's not going to go, that's not the platform that they run on. And he didn't do it over the last 5 years, okay? So that's a minor benefit to Trump, right? Healthcare costs, neither one of them did good. And it doesn't matter why they didn't good as much, because the reason why they didn't is because of the way the system is now set up. But neither one of them have brought down healthcare costs for you and for me. So that's a push. Okay, let's look at where the government is spending its money. Our government spends a tremendous amount of money on defense. I think it's pretty clear Joe Biden, because of his globalist view, okay, that we are engaged in conflicts and sending money where we shouldn't be. I don't think that any reasonable person can say with any level of confidence that the money that we have sent overseas to Ukraine or to Israel, that it can all be accounted for. And so I think that if Biden gets reelected, I think we're going to see an acceleration and increase of threats of both being involved in wars, but also future conflicts popping up. Under Trump, we did not see that. Part of the reason why is the world leaders were terrified of him, that he would come unhinged, and he was crazy. You know, when I was talking to my son about this, I said, what a great tactic. If you are the commander in chief, the best thing to do with your enemies and your allies is make them believe that they can't guess what you're going to do. And so I think it's inarguable that under Trump, the world was in much less conflict. And so from a expenditure standpoint, I think Trump comes out ahead. And so, you know, the only two areas so far that Trump has come out ahead is going to be on possible reduction of the regulatory state, the nanny state, in part due to the overturning of Chevron, and also the expenditures by the U.S. government from a defense standpoint. Okay. How about our schools? Our schools, did one politician do better than the other in terms of our schools? Well, not really. I don't see either politician exactly screaming from the rooftops of how important our educational system is and what improvements need to be made. And so I think that's a push too. Neither one of the candidates has shown me through their actions that that is a focus for them. Okay, then let's talk about from a protecting the border standpoint. Okay, there is no doubt, nobody can argue that the border policies under Biden have been lenient. That's a nice way of putting it. I'm not going to go into how many were let over and how many terrorists are in there and all that. Look, I don't know. So I can only state the amount of people that came over the border and that are receiving aid from the U.S. government, whether it's housing or it's a monthly stipend or job assistance or a down payment for a house, that the amount of aid going to illegal immigrants is hundreds of multiples more than the U.S. citizen is receiving, who's in just as dire straits. I am sorry. I believe that is fundamentally wrong. I'm not saying that people don't have the right to come to this country to seek a better life. I believe in that. But there has to be a country that they go to, and it has to exist. And currently, under the current administration, it has become completely unbalanced with the amount of money that is going to non-citizens. All right? And that is not something that is going to work out to be a long-term successful plan. Why? Because where does that money come from? That money comes from taxation. Okay? And if illegal immigrants are coming here after the government turns off the help water fountain, they're going to have to get jobs. They're going to have to integrate into the society and culture and contribute. And many of them, regardless of who's president, it's going to be difficult for them. The country right now is not in an economic position where it has a wealth of extra money laying around. So I think that Biden has, from an economic standpoint, has further burdened the U.S. taxpayer with the sheer amount of immigrants that are coming across the border. Notice what I'm not getting into is a discussion about liberty and defending our borders. No, I'm looking at it purely from an economic standpoint. Okay? The less money that the federal government has available to spend, the more you will inevitably have to foot the bill, whether that's through additional liquidity going into the economy, which depreciates the value of the existing assets, which is your income, or we can look at what Trump has done when he was in office. Oddly, he gets a lot of grief for being terrible to immigrants, but Obama actually, in his first 4 years of office, he removed more illegal immigrants and prevented more from coming into this country. And so I think, again, if you look at the facts, right, under the Trump administration, we did not have as porous a border, and you have more mouths to feed. You've got to come up with that revenue somewhere. So I think Trump gets the vote from a purely economic standpoint on immigration too. I think when we look at any other metric from an economic standpoint, corporate taxes are in similar areas, taxes on the ultra wealthy. It's pretty much all very similar. So I don't see from a direct impact on me how either one of them is really going to come out well ahead of the other candidate. So when it comes to those issues. However, I do think that especially with what happened this past weekend with the assassination attempt on Trump, I want you to think about that a vote for Trump is not a vote for the man, but it is a vote for the highest probability that your children's lives will be better, not worse. If you can honestly say to yourself, I think 4 more years of Biden will provide a better opportunity for my kids' lives to be better, then vote for Biden. If you make that statement, I'm going to tell you right now that I don't see how you logically arrived at that conclusion. When we are looking at hard issues, concrete issues like economics, taxation, trade imbalances, military activity, I don't see how the case can be made that under Biden that it's going to be better. At the very least, my hope would be it doesn't get worse. So I think if you're sitting there saying, yeah, okay, that might be true, but I just hate the guy, then I would challenge you and say, yeah, you're drinking the Kool-Aid. When you start involving your own emotions and you hate this person you probably never met, I think that's a distraction, right? I think that's merely a distraction. And I think it's something that we go to when we are faced with a decision that we know we want to make, but we don't really want to make it. I think if you look at the upcoming election using, the couple of metrics that I've laid out, I think it becomes pretty clear which candidate, and this is what I ask myself, which candidate do I think provides the highest probability for my children's lives and my life to be better? Let's strip away the grand statements and the broad 50,000 foot topics such as freedom and liberty and all that. Let's strip it away. Let's bring it down to, what have you done for me lately? I do not think there's any doubt, or there can be, and feel free to educate me, okay? But I don't think a logical analysis of the two candidates' previous activity and behavior and policies, in doing that, you could possibly arrive that Joe Biden is our best choice. I have not even discussed, okay, his mental capability. I have not even discussed whether he loves America or doesn't love America, any of that. Or I have not even discussed whether Trump loves America or doesn't love America, or all of that. That is, in my mind, okay, secondary to what they have done, what they said they were going to do, and either did or didn't do. When we look at these two candidates, I do not think that there is any doubt that Joe Biden, at the very least, if he gets reelected, okay, is going to be a continuation of the same policies. We are not going to see our taxes going down. We are not going to see relief from regulatory environment. We are not going to see more protectionist policies for trade. Protectionist policies that are merely, for most of the time, merely leveling the playing field. It's not as if other countries don't have tariffs every day of the week and use them against our industries. So I'm not talking even about security for our country. Who's going to be better at that? All of those are bigger issues. But I think if you look at Biden, you look at Trump, and the years that they were in office, no matter how much you may find it difficult to swallow, but the world was a more peaceful place under Trump. Okay? Our economy was in a better place underneath Trump. Trump wasn't the cause of all of it. Some of it he inherited the benefits of previous administrations. But I do see, okay, under Trump, that when he was in office, businesses were doing better, the average citizen was doing financially better, okay? And other than the fringes, America seemed to me a less divisive place than it is now. I'm not saying that Trump caused that or didn't cause that, nor am I saying Biden is causing divisiveness or not divisiveness, okay? What I'm stating is what it was. That is inarguable. I think under Biden that there has been more conflict globally. I think there has been more conflict domestically. However, still, it wasn't as if Trump came in and waved a wand and made all the social issues better, or worse for that matter. But I do know during that time that I had more disposable income to spend on, and I had less concern, okay, for the future, economically speaking. Because there is no doubt about it that Trump is a businessman. He's going to look at things from the context of a businessman. That can be good and that can be bad, right? Whereas Biden is a career politician. He lacks the perspective, okay, of private sector commerce, because he has worked for the big boy, the government, and he has been an employee of and a leader of that organization. He lacks the perspective. And so I think, when we get down to it, I don't see any pluses in Biden's column from an economic standpoint. I see a number of pluses in Trump's column, okay? That looking at purely from an economic and investment standpoint, I would prefer that Donald Trump get into office. And in fact, I would challenge anybody out there to educate me as to why Donald Trump will be worse for you and your family from a financial and economic standpoint if he were to get elected versus Joe Biden getting reelected. I don't think that anybody is going to be able to come up with a list of more than one thing that would give Biden that edge. There's always been this tension between different types of economic models, socialism, communism. And again, I'm just talking about economics here, okay? central run economies, which would be communism, totalitarianism, quasi central run economies with some private sector. That's China. The U.S. is not a capitalist country. The U.S. is more similar to China, quite frankly, than we are similar to, let's say, Great Britain. Great Britain is very much a socialist country, as is Canada. And so when I look at the U.S. and I look at our economy, what makes our economy strong is when we are in relationship with as many countries as we possibly can from a commerce standpoint. Remember, countries want to do business with the U.S. because the U.S. is the single largest consumer base in the world. And so they want access to your money. So why you wouldn't want somebody in office that is going to make sure that your spending money, your dollar, is going to go as far as it possibly can in the purchase of product, I don't understand. Look, I don't know if I've made the case for you today why this election is so important, why Trump is, in my mind, provides the highest probability for your economic and financial future to be better than Biden. I think I have. And I think that the challenge is going to be over the next couple of months, especially with what happened this past weekend, is not to allow the emotional part of us, right, to take over our intellectual part, where all we're doing is acting on raw emotion. That's terrible for any decisions you make in life. And I do think that this election is one of the most important elections that I've been involved with in my lifetime. Focus instead on what they have each done and how have your lives been underneath each of their presidency. I challenge anybody out there to tell me or prove to me or provide evidence that under Biden, your financial life has gotten better. But looking forward, looking at these two candidates, looking at their body of work, which one of them is going to provide the highest probability that your children's lives will be better and your life? I do not think that there is any doubt, or can be any doubt, that Trump would be the clear choice if that's the metric we're using for which candidate to choose. I do think this election is incredibly important, and I think it goes beyond just Trump and Biden. I think it's going to dictate the direction that this country goes in probably for the next 8 to 10 years. I appreciate you listening today, and I hope that you can take something from this conversation as we look towards this next presidential election. I think this election matters. I think that how this election goes is going to be perhaps have an outsized effect than other presidential elections, merely because the sheer amount of different issues that are now being discussed socially, culturally, politically, spiritually, so many different topics, as I talked about in the first podcast. So I do think that, and I do hope that, obviously, as a result of listening to this very brief podcast, that you can walk away. And if you weren't going to vote for Trump, that perhaps you'd reconsider that vote based on what I talked about today. If you are already voting for Trump, I hope that you realize that Trump is a politician, and to put our faith in any one man or woman is a step in the wrong direction. So I also encourage you, whether it's at the state, local, or federal, the country level, that when you look at candidates, let's go back to looking at their records. Did they do what they say they were going to do? What data points do we have? And because those data points are going to be the best predictor of future behavior. And ultimately, I hope that what we've ended up here today is that, having laid out some brief points about each of the candidates, where you can directly compare and contrast them, that there is no doubt that Donald Trump, okay, because he's a populist, because he's a protectionist businessman, okay, sort of he roots for the home team, right, that his policies have a much higher probability of making your individual lives better and your children's lives better than Joe Biden's, who is a globalist and has less focus on the importance of the country that he's from. So I hope that I've been able to do that. And I, of course, welcome any emails, any comments. Tell me where I'm wrong. Convince me that I'm wrong with facts. You can send those emails to podcast@MrNotAdvice.com or theboss@MrNotAdvice.com. Don't forget, I am on Twitter, at MrNotAdvice, Discord. We have a great community, and then my website. So thank you for taking the time to listen today. My next podcast can be a great one. I was able to line up having Greg Rees come on with me, and we're going to discuss NFX and EOSE from each of our unique perspectives. In the conversation I've had with him already, I think it's going to be seriously one of the best podcasts I've done. So I'm really looking forward to that. But I hope you all have a great day. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to my ramblings. And I look forward to sharing more of my thoughts again soon.
They ain't got no muscle, no hustle, no backbone. I stand alone, not tripping. Just saying, I'm different. Ain't hanging on to the